Dr. Moss, so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you. That's such a kind introduction. I appreciate that, Dr. Dwight. You're so kind. I am absolutely honored, as one of my friends would say. I am peacock proud and hippopotamus happy
Yes,
to be with Fuller today. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I want to jump in. I know that we have you for just about an hour here. And so I want to make great use of our time. First, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. I know as a pastor myself, I understand the challenges that this season is, the demands this season is placing on us. And so I thank you for taking time to be with us today. That really means a lot. Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely.
Let me start here, and let me say this for all of our participants, that if you have questions, you can drop your questions into the Q&A feature, and we will make sure that we can get to as many of those questions as allows. And just like yesterday, we're treating this is conversation time. This is family reunion. This is family backyard picnic, sitting in the backyard, having a conversation. So we'll get to as many questions as we can that will lead us kind of in our conversation. I think the first thing I want to start off by saying is actually extremely important in light of the sermon that you offered to us on Wednesday. In your message, and this is really just more of an acknowledgement and less of a question, in your chapel message, you talked about the story of Robert Smalls.
Yes. I love Robert Smalls. He's an amazing human being.
Yes, sir, to say the least.
Yes.
As you were talking about that story, as you were sharing that story, in our chat feature, one of our students identified herself as a progeny of
really?
His
my gosh.
Great granddaughter is a student here at Fuller.
That is absolutely amazing.
Yes,
that is a blessing. So you all have royalty at Fuller Seminary, because I truly believe that Robert Smalls is civic royalty in the American project. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, and I believe Tyler is a brand new student at that. So, the timing of all of that was just, it was God ordained. God ordained. Listen, my first question that I'd like you to maybe speak into, and this will kind of be our segue into getting to maybe some more meat. I know that we're virtual this year, but representation, it matters. And you mentioned in your introduction being on Fuller's campus several years ago. Mm-hmm. I was a student at Fuller when you came several years ago. And so I think it's really vital, as we are a theological seminary, that first and foremost, we are here to form students with indispensable education. I think it's important, as I reflect on being able to see you, being able to physically see you. I believe your father was with you at the time, to be able to see you all, and then to be able to see and to sit and to learn from people like Dr. Carolyn Gordon, Dr. Ralph Watkins, Dr. Love Seacrest, and even Dr. Reggie Williams, that mattered to me and did something to my Black soul. And so before we even get into nuts and bolts of the American project of the sermon, as it were, would you just please, Reverend Dr. Moss, take just a few moments, and if there's something that you would want to say to students specifically, because it matters, seeing you all, hearing your voices, getting to see you, to know you as more than just quote unquote someone on the screen or someone that you've heard of, but to be able to be in the space with that person, it matters for those students.
Yes,
would you please feel free?
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Dwight. My father often says when he's speaking, he says, quoting scripture and then giving a Southern and an African twist to it. He says, there is a great cloud of witnesses around you, that there is an ancestral group that speaks into you. And when my wife graduated from Spelman, Maya Angelou was the graduation speaker. And she said something that we never forgot. I mean, she was magnificent and noble as she always is. I see someone is shouting out Spelman. But she said this. She says, I say this as she closed. She says, for all of you who graduate, you graduate this day from Spelman. You will walk into spaces where you think you will be alone. But I want you to know that before you walk into that space, Harriet Tubman is already sitting to your right, and Sojourner Truth is to your left. Your grandmother already is in front of you. And she said, and I shall be behind you. Go forth and know you are never alone. And so I say to those who are in the fuller space, the people have already not only opened the door, but they are sitting with you in those challenging moments as you are making your way through school, trying to do your Old Testament exegetical paper, doing all of that work. There's somebody who is already there. Lean on their wisdom. Know that you're not alone. And the community celebrates with you. That Robert Smalls had to liberate a ship to get you to Fuller. I mean, you are part of a great legacy. So we salute you that you continue to open doors. You're not alone. You're not alone. And we do something at Trinity when people get married. We go through the whole process. And then we have a ritual that we do where we ask people to give the names of people who are not physically present, but made it possible for you to walk down the aisle. And it becomes very emotional for people. And so sometimes when you're feeling low, I want you just to call the names of people who poured into you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. That's important. Let's get into your words and your message, which was so timely. And I listened to your follow-up message, well, not follow-up to Fuller, but I listened to your message also about the chickens coming home to roost.
Oh, Lord. Okay. All right.
So I'm here for it all day. I'm here for it. Listen, you refer to Dr. King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for everyone, and in the culture, Martin Luther the King. You refer to him as the greatest prophet, the greatest prophetic voice of his century. Would you unpack for us what that means to you when you make that statement? What are the characteristics? What are the criteria that you're using? What brings you to that conclusion, please? And I agree with you. Please.
Yeah. Well, I think number one, prophets are always rejected by the culture in which they speak. Now, prophets call the entire community to account. And here you have someone who was marginalized, who was not considered to be fully human from the Confederate framework. Yeah. And if there was a community or an individual who just could say, let America burn itself down, here you have a community. Because I say community because he comes out of a community that knows the blues and is forcing America to sing a new song, to learn their blues, but not be so captured by the blue moment that it falls into despair, but to move into a space where it can also find the gospel. And that's the challenge that Dr. King pushed forth for us, is that the gospel in which he presented was a gospel that was structured and composed by the blues. And American Christianity doesn't know that. American Christianity wants gospel without blues. It wants resurrection without Calvary. But here you have a person from Atlanta who was not an elected official. He was not a philanthropist. He was not Bezos or Gates. He was not an individual who was the best-selling writer. He was not a YouTube influencer. And his church, on a good day, you might be able to pack 300 people in there. You might. So his local ministry was not a mega church, but his theology was something that went beyond the local parish. And prophets are usually people who never, they don't have mega moments. They don't have mega churches, but they are always people who may have mega theology. And that's part of the problem, is that we have people who have many theology, but mega churches. And that's a dangerous combination because it makes the gospel anemic in many ways. And so Dr. King is I believe, the poet, the organic theological teacher for America, that forces America to grapple with the promises America put forth, but did not want to live out. And he was always helping America, not make America great again, but saying, let's make America. An America that has yet to be. Du Bois says it this way: this is the yet to be United States of America. We are making something. Langston Hughes says that, that I too sing America, that we are making something. And unless we have that framework, Dr. King forces us to face the blues, face the tragedy, but not fall into despair, and demand that we create a democratic republic that is inclusive of all human beings who occupy the space in this land.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Talk about that blues foundation, that foundation that is so important for several of my students. Last quarter, I taught theology and hip hop culture, so my students were exposed to Cone's Spirituals and the Blues.
Yes, Oh, great book, great book.
Yes, sir. But I don't think that we recognize, and I might be leading us down a rabbit hole for a minute, but I think it's a good one. I don't think that we recognize that the thing that, as you said, the American church tends to reject about the blues and about the gospel narrative is similar to what majority culture also rejects about hip hop, that it has this ability to talk about the ugliness, to talk about the other pieces that we want to deny. And I think that one of the things that you're hinting at or intimating at in your message is that that's part of the midnight, that part of this midnight, part of what brings upon this darkness is our inability to even understand the factors, the narratives, the things that have led us to this particular space in American history. Would you, just for a few minutes, Mammy, would you maybe just unpack what are some of the big things that you think, the larger picture things that have brought us to America's particular midnight right now?
One is the myth of America, the myth of exceptionalism, the myth of that manifest destiny, the myth that we are somehow morally above everyone else. And a country that is built on stolen land. You cannot get around that. We have to deal with the genocide of the native population here and the dismissal of that group. So stolen land, stolen people build the economy of the nation. Now imagine if you were able to start a business and didn't have to pay anybody for, let's just say 30 years. You would be Jeff Bezos overnight. It's just like, I don't have to pay anybody. You have to work, and you have to work based upon the criteria that I give you. And so America becomes, and there's a wonderful book called The Half Has Not Been Told, that if you were to calculate the wealth that was created during the enslavement period to allow America to become a superpower. Yes. We are talking currently, in current numbers, you're into the trillions of dollars, that you would be one of the top 4 wealthiest nations on the planet, just kind of calculating with inflation, just calculating with inflation. So we have to deal with the myth, the brokenness, and the possibility at the same time. That's why I love what Lin-Manuel has done with Alexander Hamilton, is that in that he has included the brokenness and the possibility in the American story, which we fail to do. The Confederate ghosts still haunt America, that America can only be viewed one way, through one lens, through one hierarchy, when in actuality, it must be viewed through multiple lenses, through multiple voices, multiple chords, multiple ways. And we have a real issue of facing the truth and the horror in America, because there are some who believe that looking at the horror is not patriotic. But the reality is that true patriotism is willing to face the horror, because that's the only way that you can get to humility, forgiveness, grace, and reconciliation, is that you have to face it and say, this is what has happened. That's why I think in this moment, it's interesting. We have a lot to learn from the work of Nelson Mandela in South Africa and this idea of truth and reconciliation. And they looked at, talking about the ANC and Nelson Mandela, they were looking at what was happening in the US, in the South, in terms of how do we create a movement and a new republic that faces. They borrowed from the Black prophetic tradition when they were talking about truth and reconciliation to create one South Africa. And so America has a problem with the truth. It really does. And the church has a problem with the truth because the church in the US is vaguely Christian. And I say that it's vaguely Christian. It is capitalism with Christian garments. So it has the language of Christianity, but does not have the practice nor the embodiment, the incarnationality of a faith that raises difficult questions and is willing to walk a road of challenge and tragedy.
Yeah. Yesterday in our conversation with Vince Montu and others, we brought up Joshua 24, where Joshua is telling the people that you must put away your idols and serve God. And the people respond, yes, that's what we're doing. We're doing that. We're doing it. He's like, no, you're not able to serve. No, we are. We're serving God alone, God only.
Right.
Well, if that's the case, then why don't you destroy the idols that you have with you right now? And the fact that for me, the American church can profess, as you're saying, profess God, but protect their idols simultaneously.
Yes,
at
yes.
the same time.
And think about what those idols were made of. So when I say I have to destroy the idols, then I have to also destroy the market, my material, my wealth in the process. Because these idols are not just made out of mud. These idols are made out of precious metals. So the reality is that I don't want to destroy the precious metals, because within the Exodus narrative, when you're talking about the golden calf, we're saying, oh, they're bowing down to a calf. They're bowing down to the precious metals. They're bowing down to a market. Now, it's interesting that all that was given to them when they left Egypt, those precious items by the Egyptians, that was in many ways, that was a way to deal with the fact we kept you in slavery. So here is the restitution for that. Let's take this that we were given to build something as a nation. Let's build it as an idol, and let's bow down to the market. And it's not anything new. John Kinney, from the dean of Virginia Union Theological Seminary, Sam DeWitt Proctor Conference, he does this whole piece of saying, be careful when you bow down to the market, because you will find that you are drunk with no clothes on, running around the golden idol of the calf. But that's what was happening. Yeah.
One of our panelists one of our participants is asking, given the fact that we live in a world of anti-Africanness or anti-Blackness, anti-Black sentiment, would you mind sharing your personal evolution regarding internalizing a love and value for who we are as people of African descent?
Oh, thank you for that question. One of the things that happened in my life was I was in a nurturing faith village the Alabama Institutional Baptist Church, and my family in that particular church. And let me back up a bit. Black spirituality, Black theological framing, Black church, when it comes deeply out of that stream, is not the same as what you will experience in other communities. It's got a different theological framework. It recognizes its Africanness. And so I grew up in a church that was truly, didn't explicitly say it, but they were unashamed about their Blackness and unapologetic about their Christianity. They recognized that there was no difference between the Africanity and Christianity, that they merged together to create a theological framework and spirituality that affirmed who we were. So growing up in that community in Cleveland, and then going to Morehouse. Morehouse was transformative for me to be in a space, and this happens to students who are in primarily white spaces. You begin to think that you're an exception, and then you believe the hype that you witness in the media that is specifically designed, and it's an anti-Blackness framework, to say that there is something nefarious, wrong about you and anyone who has any degree of melanin content. So then I go to Morehouse, and I run into all these brothers who were top of their class. It's like, you're not an exception anyway. Now, I was in top of the class. I was an athlete. I just wanted to, I was glad to be able to go to Morehouse, but, I developed at Morehouse. I wasn't top of the class. But all right. But I just had to mention that. I don't want anybody to think like I was some like fantastic student in high school. But they were an anomaly in white spaces. They were normative in this Black space. So excellence was then normative.
Yes.
The way they operated was normative. They used to have cipher argument circles on the campus. People would get into a circle and somebody would throw down an idea and they would sit there and argue. They would argue between Hegel, Franz Fanon, and James Cone, and see who would come. And people just would go, oh, look what he did. So I'd never experienced being in a space where people were going at it intellectually, friends and everything, in such a way. And that was normative, transformed me because everything that I had seen on television, though I was in a community that was affirming my Blackness, the world around me was still saying that there was something wrong with me. Then I'm placed in a space known as Morehouse College that says that this is normative, you are excellent, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, there's nothing wrong with you. What is it that you want to do? Because the sky is literally the limit. That was transformative for me. And so when several of us went to Yale, some were at Yale Law, Yale Medical, they had a joke about us that y'all are so arrogant. I said, well, we belong here. We don't act like we're not tokens. This is our library. This is we do walk through the space as if we belong here.
We earned our way into.
Yes. There was it's like we know we're supposed to be here. Someone put this in us, and all of us did exceptionally well in the different areas at Yale, where there were others who deeply struggled because they were just so grateful to be there. And we would say, well, they should be, grateful that we're here. And we would lean on that legacy that we were taught at Morehouse. That is why you have a new senator by the name of Reverend Raphael Warnock. We were at Morehouse together. He belongs in the Senate, and he knows that he belongs there. He's not an exception. He's not a token. He's just fulfilling the role that he has been given. And that's the importance of having institutions like Morehouse and Spelman that have a spiritual root. And that spiritual root is about how do you live out the fullness of who God has designed you to be. Though it's not explicit in the school, it is very much a part of the culture.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I hear you in your answer saying that there's a church component as far as the community that affirms you. There's a communal appointments section as far as your family and others in the community that affirmed you. And then when you went to Morehouse, there was this educational community. So I feel like there's these three different elements: your family and immediate community, the church community, and then the community of Morehouse that was affirming you and building this in you throughout the process. And so I think for me, what I can hear several of our students saying, well, I didn't go to Morehouse, or, I didn't grow up in that Black church tradition. I grew up in a different wing of the Black church tradition. And I think what I would want our students and our participants here to hear is this is not saying if you don't have these three elements that you don't,
absolutely,
that you can't get a journey. But I would want students to then say, how do I then make sure that I become that?
Yes.
For someone else, that I'm a part of their church, their church community, or their familial community, or their institutional community, that I make sure that I affirm that in them. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think August Wilson, who I deeply love, answers that question. Here's a person who was put out of high school because they said, oh, you're cheating on your essays. This is too good for someone who looks like you. And so he went to the library and he said, I filled myself with people who affirmed me. And then I filled myself with the universal and classics of Greece and Italy and Russia and of Africa and of Asia. And he said, so I was able to create a university experience. And I realized that now when he writes, he says, Langston Hughes taps me on the shoulder and says, you need to work on that a little bit more. Then he hears Wole Soyinka saying, you need to do a better sentence over here on this one. And then he would hear Aristotle speaking with him and said, talking about what is going to be the greatest good that you write about. And so he created the space. The beautiful thing about learning, the beautiful thing about scripture is you can create a space that will nurture your spirit. Yeah. And there are mentors, there are ancestors, there are people in communities who are waiting for you. We are waiting for you. We're waiting for you to discover who you fully are. And people have left a trail of breadcrumbs. And much of it is in scripture that will lead you to who you are. And if you just take a piece of that bread, of that word, and watch your spirit soar in an anti-Black world, you will all of a sudden be affirmed about your Africanity, and then you can be unapologetic about your Christianity. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Another question is asking about, and I think you hinted at it here, about serving about people of African descent serving in predominantly white spaces. Do they have to leave those white spaces? Because there's a large exodus, I think we all know, of black faces and persons leaving predominantly white spaces. And I don't want to presume your answer. I'll let you answer first. But the question is asking about whether or not people have to leave those spaces. And I think even your example of August Wilson is a prime answer to that larger question about whether or not you have to, quote unquote, leave the space.
Well, the question about the space, is it a space that leads with its whiteness that doesn't have space for you? But if it's a space that recognizes the challenges and is unapologetic about that, there is a myth within America that we have shared, and we want to deconstruct that because we want to create a different world.
Yes.
Then we need your voice. We need your space. But there are some spaces that don't want us unless we assimilate to the style, shape that people want to use us as a pawn. Those spaces are dangerous to your spirit. Women deal with it all the time. They have to deal with spaces all the time where they're being forced to, like, you got to look like this, you got to do this. And then they ask them questions that they would never ask a man. Why don't you smile enough? Oh, do you have any children? You seem so angry. What are you talking about? You would, there's been yet to be a CEO who is a guy that someone says, you don't smile enough. Are you so angry? No, we don't. So women deal with this all the time. And it's amazing that women haven't given up on with dealing with so many foolish men, that still there are saving institutions left and right. And I'll give big ups to Stacey Abrams. She saved Georgia this year. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think, I think, I think the beauty of what you're saying, and even the example of August Wilson, is that for many of us, if we're going to navigate predominantly white spaces, whether they be institutions of education, whether they be church and worship spaces or geographic neighborhoods, whatever the case may be, I think, let me speak specifically to institutions of education. I think one of the things that I try to make sure I articulate to incoming students specifically is that you don't have the luxury of being discipline or degree specific. Meaning, if you're going to come in and study New Testament, if you're going to study systematic theology, if you're studying missions and missiology, you will necessarily, as a Black scholar, have to read outside of the quote unquote discipline, because it's not the way Black thought, it's not the way Black tradition, it's not the way we don't compartmentalize life in the same way. So if you're going to be an ethics person, you still have to read Langston.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
You have to read, and Langston may have nothing to say about quote unquote systematic theology, but you will need to read that, because in order to stand in the culture and to stand in your discipline, there's another reading list. If I could parenthetically insert that. I don't care what class you take, there's another reading list that's not on the syllabus that you'll need in order to thrive and be nourished and to be informed as you matriculate through that process. What do you?
Yeah, I affirm completely what you're saying, that there is the syllabus of maybe the discipline that you're given. But if you want to move to the space of being a teacher, and a teacher is someone who seeks to see students enlightened, to illuminate, to educate, and not just train. Because we have a lot of people who train folks. Dogs are trained. People are educated, so that you have to have a broader syllabus. So I'm teaching, it may be mathematics, but at the same time, I need to connect my mathematics to music so that I can understand the connectivity between those two things, because I want to teach everybody who is in this classroom. And then I have to understand the mathematics and the music, and then also from my cultural framework that allows me to expand things and our understanding, and then understanding things from a different cultural perspective. So if in fact you want to be a good teacher, and so that means you need to understand those who are Latinx and those who are indigenous and African, those who are Korean. You need to understand the Caribbean perspective, because all of a sudden it makes you more effective, because part of teaching is communication. And communication means that I will do my work even though my vocabulary may be broken to communicate to you. You will recognize that I'm doing my best to share this information. And then in turn, you then can receive what I'm passing on in a radically different way. That's what good coaches do all the time. I mean, I'm a sports person. Good coaches like, I'm trying to figure out the best way to motivate you so you can be your best. It's not about me. So I'm going to find out if this doesn't work, I'm going to do this for you. So we have to have a broader syllabus. I love that what you said, Dr. Dwight. This broader syllabus and reading list, if we are going to be effective, not just as teachers, but as human beings, as people who love Christ. You just cannot rest in your tradition. A good friend of mine is Brian McLaurin, and he has this book, Generous Orthodoxy. He says he comes out of the evangelical church, and he thought he was evangelical. I was like, I'm evangelical, white evangelical church. Then he went with, he had some Catholic friends, and he's like, he found out about this suffering Jesus. He's like, oh, Jesus is on a cross, because, they have the crucifix. He said, well, I guess I'm Catholic too. He said, I'm evangelical and I'm Catholic. Then he hung out with some Pentecostals, and he went to a Pentecostal church. They were slain in the spirit. He said, well, we believe that the spirit operates now in your life. And he said, well, I'm evangelical, I'm Catholic, I'm Pentecostal. Then he said he showed up at a liberal, highly intellectual church. He said Jesus is a teacher, and they were studying Bonhoeffer and studying Niebuhr. He's like, oh, I guess I'm liberal too. So, and then he said, it was really funny. He said, then I went to a black church, and they believe that Jesus is a liberator and will break chains. And he's like, I guess I'm black also in the process. But he said the transformative piece was when he met Ethiopian Orthodox Christians who embody their faith, that it's not about you confessing, it's about how you live Jesus, that if you, and they use the word, the divine dance, that when humanity made the decision not to dance with God, that was the fall. Ooh. And it's Jesus who then returns to say that I'm here to be your dance partner. The tradition says, if I choose to dance with Jesus, the world is beautified. And if other people do not dance the dance that I'm doing, the world is still beautified, and I still bless them in the process because there's somebody doing the divine dance anyway. So then, Brian then says, well, I guess I'm Orthodox and Ethiopian. He said, I'm all of these traditions that I'd closed off into one and realized that I am all of them. And I find richness in all of those traditions.
Yes, sir. I'm going to ask you a question, but first let me say, Erin Samuel, who is our administrative coordinator for the Pinnell Center, who's been in contact with your office. She is the Spelman grad that's been blowing up the Spelman.
Come on. Spelman, come on. I would tell my wife, she's going to be excited. So,
Yes.
It's the greatest church, as the greatest school on the planet. So
there you go. My daughter had the privilege of doing a semester abroad there. So
it's a wonderful institution. It is a wonderful institution. Changed my life. I'm going to
ask Aaron and staff, get your Twitter fingers ready, because I'm going to need you all to start typing out some of the things that I'm about to ask. I'll ask it in the words of the participant, and then I'm going to put it in my words because I wrote this out. I wrote the question out differently. They say, Reverend Dr. Moss, what, if any, particular places would you encourage Black influencers to visit, to receive nourishment from, or learn from? My question is, what are you tripping on right now? What are you reading? What's nourishing you right now? What are you chewing on? And as you talk, I'm gonna have them start typing out as many of these just resources. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What's feeding you right now?
So, well, first I want to say places to visit. I have been nurtured by a wonderful organization and space, the Children's Defense Fund. Founded by Marion Wright Edelman, who Spelman graduate also, I might add. She just retired from the organization, but they purchased Alex Haley's farm in Clinton, Tennessee, and turned this into a retreat center for people who are concerned about child advocacy. It also has one of the largest libraries of Black children's literature anywhere in the country. It's about 146 acres. And every summer we have been going since, I've been going since seminary, and then my children literally grew up on the farm, where they bring people from around the country, small group, where they literally walk you through. If you want to be an advocate, because as Marion Wright Edelman says, there is no other group on the planet that is more marginalized than children. So if you want to be an advocate for children and you get a chance to be around some of the most amazing thought leaders on the planet, that's where I was taught by Fred Craddock for 3 summers in a row, who is an amazing human being and preacher and teacher. This is the space where you get a chance to hear some of the great leaders, and it's a small group because you really don't have real large groups. So I would encourage people to attend something like that. The Sam DeWitt Proctor Conference is a great place to be nurtured. to become a part of the Black Church PAC, the Political Action Committee. I was one of the kind of founding members of this, but it's a wonderful group of people who are doing work to help educate people of how the church can be effective in public policy. There's a wonderful sister by the name of Reverend Bree who has the Black Millennial Cafe. And she does amazing work. I'm a big fan of Reverend Bree and her work in the Black Millennial Cafe, and would encourage, especially those who are in ministry and who are millennials, not only to visit her site, but any of the projects that she is putting together, or conversations or podcast, whatever it may be. Yeah, she's on. What I'm reading now, I'm also like a sci-fi fan, so I read like science fiction. I'm reading this series. I got it for my daughter. She didn't want to read it, so I ended up reading it. Children of Blood and Bone, and now I'm on the second book. A sister who is a Nigerian American sister who uses kind of like if you were to take Wakanda and Harry Potter and put it together, really? Honestly, those two. And it's really speaking about class. It's talking about issues of race. It speaks about, how do we work through major national conflict when two groups literally hate each other. So you have the echoes of the Nigerian Civil War, Rwanda in there, but it really speaks now to what's going on, which is really fascinating. Reading this, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do these two groups who completely see the world radically different? And it's in that fantasy realm. Again, it's kind of, like Wakanda and Harry Potter. But it does an extraordinary job of raising these questions. Another writer that I always go back to is, because they just recently did Ma Rainey, is that I'm rereading August Wilson's work. I have all of his, but there's a book of poetry that I suggest to every minister, and everybody has been just love it. It's called Poems That Make Grown Men Cry. It's like 100 poems. And all of these different actors and writers said, this is the poem that really moved me. And you get to read their story about why that poem moved them and why it means so much to them. The other is a woman by the name of Elizabeth Alexander. Oh my goodness. She was a poet laureate for the US. And Elizabeth Alexander has a book. She's such an amazing writer. And I think that people have to really come to the understanding of the beauty of language. And Elizabeth Alexander has a book about her relationship with her husband, who died rather young. And they got married a little bit later in life. And he was a chef and an artist, an amazing chef, this Ethiopian chef, and he was a painter and an artist. And she simply just talks about the beauty of grace and love and finding a relationship with someone a little bit later in your life. And though it was not a longest time as you'd wanted, but what that offered to be with someone who was not from the US, but who also was of African descent and saw the world very differently and saw the world as a village that he could live in. And I got the book. My wife took it and devoured it. Before I was like, can I read the book? It's like, no, I'm reading it now. But so we are big Elizabeth Alexander fans. She's primarily a poet, used to teach at Yale, but such a beautiful and extraordinary writer, and somebody that many times when people mention other writers that are popular, you won't hear her name because it's not the bestseller, but she's a writer that other writers, one of those people like other writers will study. They keep coming up and you read it like, oh yeah, I read Elizabeth Alexander. She changed the way I write. She changed the way I speak. She's someone who does that and is definitely worth reading. In terms of music, Right now, there's a guy from DC. He's a producer and a hip hop artist. His name is Odyssey. ODD, Odd I-C, like the letter I-S-E-E. Primarily a producer, but he produced a piece while he was in quarantine. And to hear him do pieces where he's checking in with his grandma, she's on the project, and his best friends, and for those who, because when I make suggestions about hip hop, I always make suggestions that there's certain types of hip hop people can handle some profanity, some people can't. No profanity whatsoever. He's a Muslim brother. I think his family's from Somalia. He has Somalian roots, but just joyous, and he's willing to critique things in a wonderful way. And he has this group of friends that he is producing with that will be wonderful. And then the other person is Kamasi Washington, is killer. I think that he is probably, since we haven't had anybody like this guy since John Coltrane, maybe.
Really?
Kamasi Washington can play everything. I mean, he can compose everything. He's a genius. He's the one who did, Michelle Obama asked him to do the music for her documentary because she was so enthralled by him. He's the one who has done the music direction for Kendrick Lamar. He's the one that the Washington Symphony asked to come and do compositions. This guy's a genius, and he does everything, primarily jazz, but he is a musical savant, essentially. Just every genre of music, he just has a sensibility around. And so Kamasi Washington is killer. And then the last one that I will mention is Gregory Porter. Gregory Porter is, I think he's from California. Mother was a Pentecostal minister. This guy can write. I mean, he can just, every time he comes to town, Monica and I, we always check out Greg. He has a song called Take Me to the Alley, which is a tribute to his mother, but it's also a double entendre talking about Jesus, saying that where people will be looking for Jesus, he'll really be in the alley with the homeless, with the broken, while everybody's looking for crowns and for other accoutrements. Yeah. And the guy is, his voice is pure silk. It's just, it's silk. It's just, if there was somebody who could create, silk from what vocally resonates from their mouth, it's Gregory Porter. I mean, he can do it. So those are my recommendations. Those are my recommendations.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I want to make sure, yesterday I made a statement, and I want to make sure we come full circle. I want to make sure we come full circle and get a chance to respond to this. I want us to make sure that we do spend a few minutes speaking to allies, speaking to people who are outside of the culture. Yesterday, we had really this, to me, it was a sacred space. We had Dr. Kristen Ford, who is a Fuller graduate and a college.
Wheaton, yes.
Yes. My sister, we attended Fuller together as students. And we had Dr. Marnie Campbell from Loyola Marymount University, who the African American Studies program over there. And she's a historian, UCLA grad. She specializes in urban history, but specifically early Los Angeles history. And so this sister has gone through and cataloged like all of the crime and statistics through like a 50 to 60 year period in Los Angeles early history. And then Dr. Luke Bobo from Made to Flourish. So we had this amazing conversation, and I deliberately yesterday, and I had to articulate my reasoning, deliberately yesterday did not want to get into the questions of allyship because the space had become so sacred. And as Black people, as people of African descent, often when we have these types of spaces, sometimes the conversation of allyship begins to monopolize the conversation. And so people that are coming to be refreshed then have to flip into minister mode, have to flip into teacher mode. And there's a different burden that comes with that. And so yesterday I was very careful to really allow that space to be just a sacred space. Today, however, I think it's important, especially for someone that speaks to the wide audience that you do. I think it's important for us to talk about allyship today. And so I think let's start off by just talking about maybe what are some of and there's a question here, maybe what are some of the big stumbling blocks, the big minefields to avoid, the big things to look out for. And I'll let you get your thoughts together. For me, yeah, I'll let you chew on that one for a minute. For me, there's something that we learned, and I know that it might not be politically correct, but if you grew up in a traditional, in some ways typical Black family, you found out very quickly as a child that just because you could hear a conversation didn't mean you could speak in a conversation. That when grown folk were talking, you might be ear hustling, but you stay out of that conversation. That's grown folks' conversation. And I think one thing I would want our non-Black allies to be able to hear and to respect is that, yes, there are places where we need to address our allies. We need to encourage our allies. We need to equip them. We need to help them. But that doesn't need to happen in every space. And I think we just need to be careful that we don't take certain spaces and turn the conversation back around to me, because that's also an operation of privilege. To take a space and make it about me again is something that is experienced by people within the culture a particular way. So just, I guess one of my big pitfalls would be make sure that that you're sensitive to every space and discerning every space. And there may be times where it's appropriate, and there may be times where you just need to act like you a big mama's house, and you just need to come in and sit on the couch and play checkers and just try to ear hustle and learn without actually inserting yourself into the narrative. So that would be my initial response. What are some pitfalls, some things? I mean, you've stepped in so many spaces, and you continue to walk in so many spaces. Okay,
let me say it this way. That's like a long conversation.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's a 3-day conference. Reference to that. But the first thing that I think that we need to come to grips with when we talk about this is whiteness is a stumbling block. And whiteness is a myth. When we speak of whiteness, we're not talking ethnicity.
No.
When we're talking Blackness, we're talking ethnicity, culture, and sometimes it flips to talk about color. But because I cannot identify whether I am Igbo or Fulani or Akan, the term Blackness is then used as a euphemism for a collective trauma, but at the same time culture and all that. So I don't want to kind of deconstruct that piece. But when I say whiteness is a stumbling block, is that in America, you are white when Black people are in the room. When we leave, when our Latino brothers leave and sisters leave, when everybody else leaves, you then become ethnic. So it then becomes Italian. I'm a Polish, I'm a French, but then when we come back in the room, I'm white again. It's something you can pick up and put, and don't even realize that you can pick up and put it down. So Jim Wallace helped me with this. He said, I'm white in America, but when I land in England, people were asking me if I was Scottish. He said, but when I landed back in the United States, I became white again.
Yeah.
And so we don't realize the stumbling block around the deconstruction that we need to do, that it's not culture. Though there may some cultural things may have developed over time, that it was specifically designed, the idea of whiteness was designed in opposition to Blackness. So here's the truncated history of race in America. You can get stamped if you want to, the details. But here's the truncated history. There was a rebellion in the late 1600s. It was in Virginia, the Bacon Rebellion, where enslaved Africans and indentured servants, and some Africans were indentured servants also, and there were white indentures, they got together. Those who were owners of land saw that as a major problem, because there's nothing in American history in the 1600s till you get birth into the 1700s where Africans were referred to as the N-word, Negro, Black, or anything else. They were called Africans. They were considered to be an ethnic group with a cultural heritage.
Yeah.
And so what we would say, Black people and white people, Africans and all these different ethnicities from Europe got together and said, there's a real problem in this country. It's the guy who owns the land over there. He keeps saying that you're a slave, I'm indentured, and he won't let me out of my we need to do something about this. So they get together. Well, landowners recognize we can never allow these Black folk and these white folk and then these indigenous people to ever get together again. Here's the contract that we will give you. And there's a wonderful guy, philosopher, Charles Mills, who writes a thing called the racial contract. He says that I will give you this wage of whiteness. I'm not going to give you any more money, but I'm going to give you certain privileges like those who own the land in this big house. I'm not going to give you more money, but I'm going to give you more privileges over the person that you work with in the field, as long as you don't build an alliance with them. And you can hate them if you want. Matter of fact, you can start organizations, KKK if you want to. And you can push them aside, because we don't want those groups to get together because it's a problem for us.
Yeah.
And so when we begin to see that it's socially constructed, I do all that because when you move outside the US, the idea of whiteness is radically different. Ethnicity becomes a question that is, and colonialism and things of that nature. So I don't that's all complicated, and we don't want to go through that all in detail. So that leads me to say this: big stumbling block is whiteness, recognizing it, knowing that it's socially constructed and there's privilege connected to it. But the other big stumbling block is, I don't want any allies. I want accomplices. Allies can break the treaty and say, I don't want it. That's what you have. We have the NATO alliance. They can break the treaty. Matter of fact, we recently broke the treaty with NATO. You can break the treaty when you have an alliance, when you are an ally. An accomplice will go to jail with me. An accomplice is in this work with me. An accomplice is willing to be injured with me and feels my pain. Jesus was an accomplice. The disciples were accomplices. They weren't allies. They said, when I go to Samaria, and that's what the Good Samaritan story is, which is a terrible title that we use. It's a racist title. A Good Samaritan is like saying, yes, it's a good Black person. No, he's saying that the Samaritan was an accomplice. He didn't raise the question, what will happen to me? He raised the question, what will happen to him if I don't do my duty? Yeah. I shall be an accomplice. And we need, in this democracy, we need accomplices with the idea of love and justice, of hope and compassion, of reconciliation, repentance, and redemption. We need accomplices around that who can then say, I am privileged. One of the ways in which Harriet Tubman was able to do some of her work, she's like, I got a few accomplices that are telling me what's going on up there around this bend. They are putting themselves on the line. Frederick Douglass says that there's got to be accomplices. When he went to England, he found that people in Ireland and Scotland, they love Frederick Douglass over there. Because he says, you know what, we want to be accomplices with you because we understand the pain. We know what exclusion is like, and you speak our language. So they reached into their pocketbooks and they said, here's some money, but at the same time, we're not just going to give you money. If you go toe to toe with the American government, you can count on the Irish, you can count on the Scottish, you can count even on the British. It's extraordinary when you begin to look at this, because they said we want to be accomplices too, because this algorithm of difference and exclusion must be permanently deleted from the hard drive of American democracy.
Sir, I'm glad we are virtual, because I probably would have thrown something at you. I do come from the Black church tradition. I'll run up and hit you. Accomplices, not allies. I've already tweeted that. God bless you. I give you credit the first time. After that, it's mine. I do want to, we're getting ready to wrap up here. I do want to say also, for those who are interested, we do have at Fuller, we developed, along with our executive director at the library, we did develop a LibGuide. I think Aaron or someone has that. They can drop that in the chat there. We did develop a LibGuide. So for all those soon-to-be accomplices that want to be go to jail with us, that you want to get your booking photo taken right next to mine, there is a list of books and resources, because that's a question that often comes up, what should I be reading? There's an entire LibGuide. We've done that work already, so that's there. Listen, I want to say a few things, and then I'm going to allow Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III to give us our closing thought and benediction, as it were. I want to thank all that have made this week possible. And Dr. Moss, everybody doesn't know this. Now, I'll say this. I want to thank you for your flexibility with us as well. Once we had realized that we were scheduled at the same time as the inauguration and everything that was unfolding, we had to make some changes. And I know you were away at the time, but you were so flexible with us. And I wanted to thank you for that graciousness, for that grace to be able to be flexible with us. Thank you so much, man. That means the world to us, because we really wanted to hear from you this week. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Really, really has been my pleasure.
Listen, tonight, join us at 6 p.m. 6 p.m., we've got our gospel celebration. It's going to run the gambit of the Black musical tradition. I think the only thing we don't have is a straight out jazz artist, but I think we've got a little bit of something for everybody tonight. It's going to be great. Thank you to our events staff, to Dana and the entire team, Andrew and Reed running everything behind the scenes, to everybody that's been helping us all week long and will be helping us tonight. We are so grateful. Our president, Dr. Laberton, was in the chat feature very early on and gave his regard, Dr. Moss. I want to make sure I send that along as well. We have had an excellent turnout all week long to the festivities and the events. So we are so glad that people have been able to tune in and have been refreshed and have been revived, have received the water that their souls so desperately needed in these dark times. At this point, I want to ask you, Reverend Dr. Moss, any closing words that you want to give? If you want to pray the benediction, if you want to lay hands virtually, what Reverend Doc, I'm here. I'm here for all of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dwight. This was just wonderful. I have great respect for the work that you all are doing at Fuller. I was so glad that you mentioned President Laberton. Thank him for having the vision to support this kind of work. And also, I was on a little bit earlier watching the webinar. I love what the studio does. The readings, and I'm gonna subscribe to that. I'm like a podcast and YouTube junkie, so I'm definitely gonna subscribe. Oh, it looks great. Great production. We're going to have to call, because that's a whole nother thing. If you ever do anything dealing with cinema and stuff, I started out in cinematography. So that's kind of I love talking about that stuff. But I want to just offer this, that Isaiah in the first chapter talks about that we've got to wash our hands, that there's blood on them, that we have to do what is right. To care for those who are oppressed, the widows and the children. And we're in this moment where our hands are stained as a nation. The complicit and duplicit actions in this country. And we are going to need voices of faith that are not vaguely Christian, voices of faith that are Jesus folks, who are radical, revolutionary, nonviolent truth tellers, organizers, poets and artists, teachers and creatives, architects and engineers and directors and producers, people who have vision that though it tarries, and we're willing to wait on it so that it will not perish. This is what we need. That's how movements are built. We don't need insurrectionists. We need revolutionaries who are willing to bring forth a revolution of love rooted in justice. That's where we are as a nation. I think that is what this country deeply desires. There is a need for spirituality and not conspiracy, where people will have a deep connection and raise questions about what does it mean to be compassionate? What does healing actually look like? What is the language that can crack earth, like the poet Elizabeth Alexander speaks of, that can break systems? And it begins with the power of life and death that has been given to us, that is wrapped in the tongue, that we have to be careful what we say. We need these moments in this reckoning. We've dealt with COVID-19, and we have yet to distribute a vaccine for COVID-16-19. And that will be the moment in America when America can truly become America, when we recognize, one, that there is an epidemic within the pandemic that is keeping us from being a true democracy. So I offer this blessing. I've been reading a lot. I forgot to mention that I read a lot of John O'Donohue, who is he is an Irish poet. And also he writes prayers. His poems are prayers, actually. He calls them blessings. He says there's a whole tradition of blessing. And though it's inspired by him, but it mixes a little bit of John O'Donohue and the Pentecostal tradition, which is an African tradition for those who don't know William Seymour. Anyway, this idea of spirit possession, so if you're a Pentecostal, you're practicing African faith, just want to let you know. So I'd always tease all my Pentecostal friends around that. But I merged the two traditions from Pentecostalism and kind of the Celtic spirituality that O'Donohue offers, and it simply goes this way, and I just pass this on to everyone at Fuller. May the peace of God be with you. May the peace of God be with you and with you. May no demonic force enter your household. May the Spirit of God sweep into every corner and crevice, and may the light of Christ chase away shadows and empower you to be courageous and bold, even when your voice shakes. May the peace of God be with you. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sunlight of Jesus Christ grace your cheek. May you be not an accomplice, not simply just someone who is willing to be in alliance, but an accomplice. May you be one who speaks truth to power and also offer words that empower and bring down empires. May rain gently fall on your field, and may God keep you in the hollow of God's hand. Until we meet again, please get into some holy mischief and some good trouble. God bless.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moss. Thank you so much.
Thank you.